Hello and welcome to Apex Magazine's Snap Judgment number 8. We were just talking about how it's number 8 and we can't believe that we're here. And we can't believe you're here. Thank you for joining us today. If you've never been to Snap Judgment before, this is how it works. This is our chance for our patrons and subscribers to submit the first pages or first paragraphs in some cases of their genre short stories or novels up to 250 words. I, your host and narrator, Aly Grauer, will be reading these submissions, which are anonymous. And if any point during this process, our panel of editors and judges would stop reading in the slush pile, they will raise their hand on screen. Once all three hands are in the air, or I get to the end of the submission, I will stop reading, and then we will discuss why they would have stopped reading in the slush pile at that point. The judges' critiques today are meant to help you hone your craft, of course, and to answer that age-old question of what a magazine editor is really looking for. First pages are notoriously difficult to master, and all of us are learning different things in different parts of our processes. So we hope that today we'll be able to shed some light on your process, even if your submission doesn't get read today. We do receive more stories than we can cover during the length of this stream. So if yours is not chosen and you did submit it, we apologize in advance for not getting to it. And if we get to your work, we also apologize in advance. We'd like to welcome our panel of editors and judges today. We have Lesley Conner, Apex Magazine's editor-in-chief and author of the alternate history extreme horror novel, The Weight of Chains. Welcome, Lesley.
Hi.
We also have Rebecca E. Treasure, managing editor and flash editor of Apex Magazine, and a writer with short fiction in Galaxy's Edge, Air and Nothingness Press, and many others. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hello.
We also have our very special guest today. Richard Thomas is the award-winning author of 4 novels, 4 short story collections, 175 stories in print, and the editor of 4 anthologies. He has been nominated for the Bram Stoker twice, the Shirley Jackson Thriller and Audie Awards. Richard, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, excited to look at these stories and see what's working and what's not.
Absolutely. It's always eye-opening for all of us, and we always have a really interesting discussion. So, as I said, I'm Aly Grauer, your host and narrator. I'm happy to be back here with Apex and the gang. And I think if we're all ready, we can get started. We ready?
Cool.
Yeah.
Go.
Awesome. Our first submission for today's Snap Judgment has the title Born Again. It is a dark fantasy / horror, and it's a short story, a long short story, it says. Some of them, Richard, have more details about the length of the piece, which can sometimes give insight. So I will include that as needed.
Awesome.
So this is Born Again. When I find God, he's sitting on the curb of the truck stop parking lot, head bowed, just outside the glow of fluorescent storefront lights. The night is moonless. My headlights sweep across him for only a second, but that's enough. It's a strange thing, beholding God. There's this belly feeling, low and hard-hitting, that forces the acid up into my throat. It's a lot like drinking a 5th gas station coffee, the way the caffeine stops working and all I'm really doing is burning holes in my stomach. The lot sits empty. I bow low as I pass God and park on the opposite side. He doesn't look up as I walk down the gum and ash-stained sidewalk. In the shadow of the building, God's wiry body is indistinct. His relaxed profile makes it seem like he's waiting for someone. I pause in the light of the front doors. I'd always been told only those blessed by God could recognize his earthly form. That thought puts a stitch in my side. But God hasn't given the slightest sign of noticing me. I can't be his man. Best not to overthink. My childhood pastor said, don't overanalyze the Lord. Just be ready to welcome him into your life and he'll do the rest. Never had reason to question that. I've seen plenty on TV about folks finding the Lord, the Lifetime movies of trials and tribulations, God at their side, but never met one of the blessed myself. Off to a strong start. That was our first submission in its entirety. Let's go ahead and start with Lesley.
I will say, like, I am intrigued at this point, but I feel like we are verging on maybe a little too much info dumping right at the beginning. Like, I really like that first sentence. Like, you see God, you kind of tell us why you know it's God, because it's this feeling. But then I kind of felt we were starting to edge into you're weighing down the story in the backstory. Like, I wanted, like, nothing is happening, and I was ready for something to happen with these pieces of information kind of dribbled in through that. Because at this point, like, it seems highly likely that this person's just going to walk past God and nothing else happens. Like, you know what I'm saying? Because nothing is happening. God's not noticing him. Like, so I would just beware that something needs to happen pretty soon after where we start. Because let's face it, this is a very short clip. I'm not even, like, it doesn't even feel 250 words long. So I would, like, very soon after this, something needs to start happening, or I would be checked out. I would be like, all right, it's just going to be this rehash of what their pastor has told them in the past. So yeah, that would be, you've got me now, but move it quickly along to something else.
Yeah, I checked really quick, and it looks like, according to Google Docs, it's 247.
Okay,
But
well, that felt like
it feels fast.
It felt fast, and I was like, is that 250?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go with Rebecca.
Yeah, I love the detail in this. The fifth gas station coffee with you burning holes in yours. That is a great detail. And there's this excerpt is rich with those kind of great details, but I think that there's a few too many great details, and we need, what I wrote down was, not that I wanted something to happen, but who is telling this story? So some kind of opinion. We were kind of getting into that with, like, my pastor told me this, but I'm not really sure how this character feels about finding God in a parking lot. And so I'm not sure how I'm supposed to feel about this character finding God in a parking lot. And so this is a really interesting opening, but I was just like Lesley, I was starting to be like, okay, where is the story coming from, so that I can start to, like, emotionally get invested in where it's going.
That's a great point. Absolutely. Richard, what do we think?
Yeah. Really interesting opening. I was waiting to see when I was going to raise my hand. I'll echo what Lesley and Rebecca are saying here. A lot of when I look at a story, whether it's for a class I'm teaching or if I'm trying to acquire it somewhere, and I come at this as a writer, an editor, a teacher. I used to run Gamut Magazine, Gamut's back. I used to run Dark House Press. So I come at it from all sides. So as a writer, I'm looking to see what's going on here. As a teacher and editor, I'm looking for different things. As a publisher, different things. I like what was said about the lack of internal, in that we don't have a strong sense of his feelings. I assume him. I don't know if you get that. I'm looking for the inciting incident, that moment in time after which things will never be the same. Obviously, if you're seeing God on the side of the road, that qualifies. External conflict, we're getting some of that, but kind of like what Lesley was saying, nothing's really happening. So I'm waiting for, okay, you've seen God, and, like, are you high on drugs? Is this like, he says he's not chosen. So I'm like, okay, then why are we here? I use all facet, whatever our belief, whatever our religion, whatever our spirituality. I think we all want to believe there's something out there, that you don't just die and that's it, and it's blackness forever and there's nothing more. We want to believe there's something, whether it's, whether you're Catholic, Muslim, whatever you believe, reincarnation, Buddhist, something is out there. So anytime I see a God story, I'm like, okay, show me something I haven't seen before, and then where can we go with this? I would also like to see a little something. I have a story called A Caged Bird Sings in the Darkness of Its Own Creation, and there's a scene with this creator, and he's, like, doing things in the darkness. He's, like, sparking these little marbles and, like, creating things. Like, I would love to see a little bit of something kind of magic and wondrous to help me to believe that this is actually God. Because who amongst us, if we ran across God, wouldn't want to ask him some questions, right? And then the only other thing that I was, like, hesitating on the putting the hand up was, I'm a spiritual person, but I'm not a religious person. And so I'm at some point, like, we're saying God a lot. We're talking about religion. It's getting on the edge of being a little preachy for me. And, like, I want you to show me something, right? So I'm like, how many times do we say God in the opening? How many times do we say Lord? How many times do we say blessed? And I'm like, I'm getting to the point where I'm getting close to rolling my eyes on this, because I want you to do something more with it.
I do agree. Like, to me, in what we have now, it could be right after this that this gets cleared up. But there's nothing that really indicates, other than this guy's gut feeling, that this
Right.
is God.
Yeah.
And how many truck stops do you go in and you see random people just sitting there? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Mhm.
I don't know that I don't trust this narrator's gut feeling at this point. So I need something to come along that's going to make me trust what he's saying, or going to make me be like, nah, that's not what's going on. Like, I need kind of some way to know how to feel about this narrator.
Yeah, and I'm waiting for it to split. Is this either going to be, is this really God? And if it really is God, man, I want to see what that looks like. So give me some insight. We want to know the secrets of the universe. If it's not, if he's having a mental break, if he's on drugs or something, then get me to that part too. And then why are you telling me this story? Because I think the reason a lot of us jump out is that you go, oh, I've seen it before. It's cliched. Not another drug story. Not whatever it's going to be, whatever the trope is. And so I'm hoping that's a great first line. I'm like, okay, go. What next? I mean, Neil Gaiman did a great job with American Gods, showing gods in a modern setting and try to do something a little bit different with it, right? So that's what I'm waiting for, is a little more.
I was reminded of the P.H. Lee story, Just Enough Rain. If you've ever read that, it has God as a character, and it would be interesting to look at the opening of that and see how it indicates the things that we're kind of talking about. But I was also thinking that expressing some kind of strong opinion about God, because like Richard was saying, we all have opinions about God one way or another. And so that would kind of ground me in the character's perspective if the character were to tell me what they really feel about this encounter, or some kind of opinion about their childhood pastor and all that, instead of just telling me about it. How do you feel about it?
Right. And you say dark fantasy horror. I'm like, I'm not really getting a lot of the dark fantasy horror yet. I think about like Hellraiser, and isn't there like some Christ-like imagery of a guy with like a thorny crown and like flies and horrible things happening? I'm like, where are we going? Where's the horror? Where's the dark fantasy? I want the magic and the wonder, but if you're going to be horror, give me a hint of that. And so far, it's pretty quiet as far as that.
Yeah, I definitely think that what we're getting at here with the submission is that it goes by quickly. We felt like it was barely 250 words, and it is. But that how challenging it can be, right, to get across what you as the author are trying to get across in the first 250 words.
Yeah.
And these submissions are short on purpose because it is a challenge, and it is sometimes for these editors that fast of a reaction. So take that into consideration with your own piece, and try to find what you want them to feel and take away as fast as you can, I guess.
Yeah, because kind of the vibe I'm getting from Lesley and Rebecca here, the way I feel is that I'm getting close to losing interest. And so I'm like, you better do something soon. And so people really, first 250 words, you have to really grab us. And you grab us with the hook on the first line, and then not a whole lot since then. It's just like I talk about the tip of the spear and the tip of the mountain, that's an iceberg, like give me clues of what's coming. And like, I just want a little more. I would probably keep reading, and depending on what came next, I might read the whole story, but I'm also looking for a reason to bail because I'm starting to lose interest. And I'm like, if you don't start doing something original, if it's 2 more pages of God this and Lord that, and like nothing's really established, I'm probably going to be out. And I don't know how you read, Lesley or Rebecca or Allison or Jason or anybody else. I'm looking for reasons to say yes. I'm looking for reasons to say no. So like, if I'm reading and I'm bored, I might I try to read as much as I can until I lose interest. And then if I really am like, well, it's a good idea, I might jump to the end and just read the last paragraph and see if they brought it home. And I'm like, ooh, okay, I didn't see it going there. It turns out it's this cosmic horror. Okay, I'll go back. Or sometimes I'll skim, I'll just read the first line of a bunch of paragraphs. It should hold my attention. I should want to read the whole thing. I should never eject. I should never lose the spell that you're casting. If I do, that's pretty soon, 3 strikes, you're out, and I'm gonna move on.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, probably one of the main reasons that I pass on stories for Apex Magazine is usually I'll get 3 or 4 pages in, but if I'm 3 or 4 pages in and I don't know why we're here or how it's speculative at that point, then at that point, I'm like, I don't have time to read 16 more pages because I've got 90 other stories waiting.
Exactly. And I think we're always looking at whatever's going on in this story. It's a God story, it's a dark fantasy horror story. Is it a werewolf story, a vampire story, a demon story, whatever trope, whatever characters, whatever thing you're doing on the page. show me what you're doing, and then what are you doing differently? You don't have to necessarily, for me, reinvent the wheel, but if you're going to pay homage to classic tropes, then you better bring something else. Your experience has to be different. What you funnel into it, who you are, your culture, your orientation, your religion, whatever. Or if your style is just so amazing that your prose is going to blow me away. Is it just a vibe story? Sometimes that'll do it for me. If I'm like, oh, I've seen another Little Red Riding Hood story, but I'm like, oh my God, this is so good. I'm like, okay. But whatever you're doing with your story, I'm sure all of us could be assigned a story, given 5 prompts, or 10 prompts, and you have all these set rules in the same place. They would be pretty different stories. We probably overlap in a few places because it's a werewolf story or it's a demon story. It's going to be certain elements we feel are essential, but the rest of it, that's how you separate yourself. That's how you stand out. That's why one of my favorite things about running Gamut in the past and Dark House Press too was I would get submissions from all over the world. And somebody's interpretation of a spirit, what if they're in Japan or they're in Australia or they're in Poland, the first Baba Yaga story I saw, the first Golem story or a Wendigo story, I'm like, oh, like myths and things I'm not that familiar with. So whatever you're trying to do, and the thing I'm looking at this story right now, I'm like, oh, a God story, a dark fantasy horror God story. Show me the money. Let's see it. Let's go. And so like there's a great first line, but I'm like, we better get going soon on this one.
Awesome. Really, really good stuff. We're already like in it, and I love that. I'm going to move us along to the next submission. This is a short ghost story, it says, and the title is Something Long Buried. The cabin is perfect. The oak floors, the hand-carved furniture, the reading nook. This summer, I'm living the cottagecore dream. I kick off my shoes, skating across the hardwood floors in my socks. Next stop, the bedroom. A blue and gray pinwheel quilt is draped over the twin bed. Across from it is a desk, and the floor in between is covered with a thick wool rug. There's a dresser in the far corner. Still life paintings dot the walls, and light gray curtains hide the windows. I jerk them open to reveal unending darkness. I blink and rub my eyes. A thick tree trunk is blocking the sunlight, casting long shadows. Not quite the forest view I signed up for, but oh well. Letting the curtains fall, I turn to my pile of stuff. Renting a fully furnished house cut down on what I needed to bring, but unpacking will still take a while. Mentally rolling up my sleeves, I fill the dresser first, then turn to the closet. Somehow my feet get tangled up with the rug and down I go. I'm okay, I shout out of habit. I drag myself clear of the rug so I can put it back, except there's a crack in the floor. Pushing aside the rug reveals a square door with a metal ring, like something out of a Nancy Drew novel. Weird. Mr. Whitaker never mentioned a basement.
Yeah, I saw your guys' hands go up.
Yeah, so we had Lesley go first and then Rebecca. Richard, you didn't raise your hand. Tell us why.
I was waiting for something to happen.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm intrigued. I have my Word doc, so I didn't see Lesley. I saw Rebecca's go up to Lesley. There's a lot of short declarative sentences. Is it me or are there like some typos in this? I don't know if that's their fault or our fault or whatever, but either way, that always bugs me. So I mean, I seriously, the first line, the cabin is perfect, not a hook. Then there's like an M dash and there's extra spaces, no periods, like cottage core. I'm like, is that the thing? I don't know. I got red lines under my so I'm like, I think I saw Rebecca go out the second paragraph. It's a lot of short declarative sentences in a row and nothing's really happening. So I think it's hard. I think I want to try and give a story if I can up to the first scene break, but if there's no scene break, I was nodding my head when your hands went up, both of you guys, and I'm like, yeah, nothing's happening. You say something long buried. I have no hint of anything where it's going. It's starting to get a little bit cliche for me. The Nancy Drew, I'm like, I felt myself rolling my eyes in a couple spots, and like I don't like doing that. I just feel like I'm like, okay, well, do something different, be more original, push it. I'm waiting for it to really get going. And so I gave it the full 250, probably more for this exercise than maybe I would do when I'm really reading it, but there's nothing's really happening here.
Rebecca?
Yeah, so I agree that nothing's really happening, but what made me raise my hand is, well, first of all, that first sentence, I understand that we're trying to convey that the character's emotional state, that they're happy to be where that they are. And sometimes with ghost stories, we want to start with a sense of normalcy so that we can disrupt that later. But perfect is a meaningless word, because perfect to me is different than what's perfect to you and what's perfect to somebody else. So give me something concrete to either agree with or disagree with, right? Because even if I disagree with what your conception of perfect is, like part of the joy of reading is to getting into other people's perspectives on things. So I would not use that first sentence as a strong hook. Tell me why they needed to escape, maybe, but that first sentence. And then the reason I raised my hand was I'm a big fan of rich sensory detail, and none of these descriptions are necessarily bad, but it's all visual. Yep. It's like a camera moving around as opposed to really placing me in this location. What does it smell like? Is this a desert cottage? Is it fall? Is it spring? Is it raining? Is it summer? Is it night? Like, put me in this room as opposed to just describing it for me. So that's why I raised my hand. Like there's a lot of
tell in there, a lot of tell and not a lot of show. You're telling me it's perfect. You're right. That's I give examples of showing versatility. If you tell me something's beautiful, if you tell me something's scary, doesn't make it so. What does that mean? When you could even say it's perfect and then dash it. What do you mean perfect? Open it up. Maybe your idea of perfection is something horrifying, and then we're really intrigued. Or maybe it's this really cute little cabin somewhere, and we're like, you're setting up this space of peace and beauty and wonder and magic, which I love to pair with darker things. But you're right. It's like I felt the second paragraph where I said there's a lot of short declarative sentences. You're like, look at that, look at that, look at this, look at this. There's really no feeling, and I'm not getting much internal, and the descriptions are flat and simple, right? If you're going to show me this, unpack it and get weird with it, right? Pull me in.
That's a really good point about it being very visual. And I wonder, as a sidebar, I wonder if the use of the word cottagecore makes me feel like it was chosen for its aesthetics for the character, that all of these are visual elements, and this character is very interested in the visual aesthetic of the cabin and the escape and whatever. So I wonder if that was the point, then maybe it could be more clear from the get-go to the reader that this is what is needed. It's needed to look perfect. It's needed to look a certain way. Lesley, what did you think?
Lesley, where'd you bounce?
Like the first sentence in the second paragraph, because I realized that I was skipping ahead of where Aly was reading. And I'm going, because I was like, I'm looking for something to happen. And the beginning of this feels very much like it's an Airbnb description of a cottage. And you're not trying to rent me this cottage. You're trying to sell this ghost story to me. And you're telling me that this is a short story, which means, and it's a short ghost story. So yeah, you may want to start with your character in a place where they feel safe and they feel like it fits their aesthetic. But very quickly, you need to start adding things in that maybe the character doesn't see, but for the reader, pings that like feeling of dread. A good ghost story gives you that feeling of something's not quite right from the beginning. Even if your characters don't see it because they're people and they're like, oh, well, that's not weird. But your reader needs to start feeling that dread. Like a really good ghost story is going to make you start feeling that very, very early on. And all we're getting here is a description. And a description that could be written for an Airbnb like cottage rental. But put something weird that's just a little bit off, that maybe, the character doesn't say, oh, well, that's going to come back and haunt me 5 pages from now, but kind of tips the reader off like, uh-oh, you need to beware of, the pointy fireplace poker that's, or whatever it is. You got to give me some reason to feel like dread is coming, or otherwise your ghost story is not going to be scary. And a ghost story that isn't scary is missing the mark. I mean, unless you're purposely going for like comedy horror or whatever. But a really good ghost story builds that dread, and they start it really early. And like the best ones are the ones where you're reading and then you go, ooh, wait. and you go back and you're like, why did I miss that? But there's none of that, like, why did I miss that in this? It just feels like description, with no heart or soul or feeling at all.
Yes. So
Yeah.
Aly, what you said about that maybe this isn't intentionally visual and that's trying to like demonstrate the character's perspective, which is something that I talk about in crits, is like make sure that your character is the one telling the story and make me inhabit their space. But if that's the case, then I want an opinion, and not quite the forest view I signed up for, but oh well is not a strong opinion.
Yeah.
It's again, it's visual and it's kind of like surface level. Like, why do they need a forest view? Are they like trying to build a social media platform, or like what is their what are they doing here? And so get me deeper into the character. And then if it makes sense for this character to be all visual, then it's intentional, and I'm going to stick with you a little bit longer. But I wasn't it didn't feel intentional to me.
And I wonder, you guys, if we hadn't put short ghost story on here, would we have known it was a ghost story? Is there anything ghosty in this? I'm like, where's
There's
the
nothing
ghost?
spec at all that I can tell.
There's nothing spec. And I will say, when we got to the point with like, oh, like you're finding the hatch in the floor. Oh, I didn't know there was a basement. I started getting like Evil Dead vibes, and like the inside of me is going, that's done. That's been done. That's been done. Like, I don't know that you're going to bring something like at this point, what we have. I don't feel like you're bringing something new to me or anything.
Right. Yeah. Even the reference to Nancy Drew. I mean, I read Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys when I was a kid. I'm 55. So who's thinking about Nancy? I mean, I guess there are reboots and stuff going on now. Maybe I'm missing something, but could there be a more contemporary example? I don't get anything ghost in this opening at all. And I think if you're gonna write a ghost story, we should have some sense. You mentioned dread, Lesley. Something's off. Some mix of peace and things that are unsettled. Something. I just recently wrote an existential ghost story that was in an anthology, and man, the beginning is so weird. Like if you can't figure out what I did in the opening, then I failed you. But it's definitely a lot. It's all five senses. There, it's the vibe, the things you're seeing. All it just feels like something's definitely off from the jump, right? So I don't think we're getting that here.
Makes a lot of sense. I wonder, especially since Becky mentioned the other senses and opinions, that maybe if the character is harping on the visual details of the situation and the environment, that maybe the unsettling parts come from the other senses because she's not focusing on them.
Yeah. Is the character the ghost? I mean, I don't know how people feel about, can ghosts only see? Can they use all five senses? That was actually something I dealt with. My protagonist was actually dead. She was actually a ghost. So I'm like, I don't know. What are the rules? Well, you can do what you want, right?
Nobody has an authority to ask, so go ahead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm like, either you have no senses, or sure, you can have them all. Why not? So
yeah, why not?
I went for all because I'm a maximalist.
We're going to move on to the next entry here. We have a horror short story titled The Garden Gnome. When Kelsey first saw the gnome, a deep and horrible feeling of revulsion twisted in her stomach, and she almost screamed in the middle of the store. The cart she was pushing came to a grinding stop, and she nearly dropped her cell phone. There were 5 garden gnomes on the end cap facing her. Her eyes were glued on the one in the middle. "Babe?" David's tinny voice said over the phone's speaker. Kelsey clutched onto the phone, unable to speak. For a moment, for the slightest impossible instant, it seemed the gnome was alive, that a living, breathing being was huddled there on the shelf, and that it was looking directly at her. She steadied herself against the cart and glanced around the store. Surely the other shoppers saw it too. But no. The other customers shuffled up and down the aisles, lost in their own worlds. "Kels?" David said. "Kelsey." Kelsey blinked to clear her eyes. When she looked again, the gnome was only a decoration, another of the thousands of products designed to lighten her wallet for the benefit of the world's largest home goods retailer. The married couple had finally had a home of their own after 2 years of rented apartments. The last thing Kelsey wanted in the front yard was something as tacky as this. "They're hideous," she said, pointing the phone's camera toward the display. David's face grinned from the phone's surface. "There they are," he said. So no hands? Was that no hands that went up that time?
thought about raising
We're
my
all
hand.
we're all
Close.
making we're
It
all
was
making a very
close,
similar
but-
face right
Yeah.
now. I feel like we're all embodying the same thoughtful expression. Becky, could you do us the honors?
Sure. This one had a lot of character opinion and description. I almost my eyebrow went up a little bit in the first paragraph because the first two sentences have a very similar structure, and then the second two sentences, the third and fourth sentence have a very similar structure. So I'm starting to be like, okay, how closely was this read? That's something that really helps pacing and controlling how the reader's receiving the story. And then something about tinny voice was a concrete enough detail that I was like, all right, I'll stick with you. And that's a weird thing, kind of creepy but I really almost raised my hand at the married couple because that's not how we think of ourselves. And this is up until that point, we are deeply in Kelsey's perspective. And it's not like the family with 2 children went to the grocery store, right? So suddenly we're like thrown out of this deep POV, and that's really jarring. I probably that was like strike 2 kind of, and I probably would have kept reading a little bit, but I would have been looking for something really surprising or really well crafted or something to really hook me in deeper. It was close there.
Lesley.
So as you read this, when you got through that first sentence, I wrote down seems excessive. Because just we've all seen garden gnomes in the type of store. We know exactly what type of store Kelsey is in. And we've all seen them. And for her to like come to this grinding halt and almost scream in the middle of the store, my initial reaction is like, well, why would she, even if you're repulsed by them, that seems excessive. There are several instances, and married couple is one of them, where I really feel like there seems to be extra words like the slightest impossible instant. Well, an instant is already very small. Like, you don't need to tell us like it's the slightest one, or they're saying they finally have a home of their own. So we know they bought a house, but then you're going 2 years of rented apartments. And it's like, okay, but we know they're in their first home. We know they if they're in an apartment, they rented it because it's not their that would have been their first home. Like, there just seems points where you could just go through and tighten up some of your word choices and your phrase choices just a bit, so that it's not pinging that, they're not necessarily wrong, but it's like in my head, because it happened several times in this 250 words, where I'm going, it just seems like an extra word that you could cut out to make this a leaner story, where you could use those words if you're trying to keep it a short story, to give us details or to build the feelings or of dread, or to build the characterization or the setting in a way that those words would be better used. So I would really go through and just kind of check yourself, like, am I being redundant in some of my wording? Because we all know when you're writing short fiction, every single word counts, and a couple redundancies in a 5,000 word stories is fine, but like a few redundancies in the first couple of paragraphs, it does start to like ping my little writer, like my editor brain, going, okay, well, we could trim this, we could tighten this up, we could make it more impactful by cutting some of these extraneous redundant words.
All right, Richard, what do you think?
Yeah, all of that. It also, for me, I felt like there were a lot of passive words in here. She almost screamed. She nearly dropped. It seemed the gnome was alive. I don't like that. It feels like she's either pulling her punches or just being passive about it. I just want you to say it's alive, or just get to the point. I think you're kind of like what you're saying, Lesley, about it being a little, we're saying things a couple, 2-3 times and saying the same thing. It also feels a bit melodramatic. I don't get why she sees a gnome and I mean, did she have an incident from her childhood where she was abducted by some serial killer who forced her to, I don't know, do something with no? I'm like, where is this coming from? I don't get the reaction. It doesn't make any sense to me. Um, I don't. I don't know, something about the casualness of it too, the babe and the Kels and stuff. Like, just not. I don't know. Maybe it's too contemporary for me. I want to see where this is going, and like it just was a little casual for me. I'm not a big fan of humor in horror, or I can do lightness in horror. Like Stephen Graham Jones, one of my favorite authors, and like he could do funny, he could do weird, and he could also be really serious and dark. I'm like, where is this going? And then the last line, which I can't believe we actually got to it, was David's face grinned from the phone surface. There they are. I don't know what he's talking about. So there's a couple things. What do you mean they? Are the gnomes? Is he looking for, like, I feel like it's leading into something else, but at the end of this, it's a woman seeing a gnome in a Home Depot and freaking out or whatever. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't get it. It doesn't add up too much to me.
Well, much like with the first story where the guy could just walk past God and that could be the end of the story and nothing actually happens, she can just walk out of this Home Goods and not take a gnome home and nothing happens. Now that there they are, that does hint that for some reason her husband really wants one of these gnomes. Okay, but if your spouse is like actively repulsed by something, would you force them to bring it home?
Yeah.
like what kind of marriage is this that she's like terrified of this thing and he's like, yes, please bring it home?
Yeah. Although it might go with their cottagecore look. No.
It might go with, it's going to show up in the other one.
I mean, I think gnomes can be creepy. Anything you start to lean into the uncanny can be weird. I mean, you could have had a moment where they're walking and she bumps something. It feels like something bites her leg or something. There's a mark and it's like a real physical evidence of something. And then she looks down and there are these gnomes and she has a phobia of gnomes. And maybe it comes from someplace. Like, I want you to show me this. This is serious. This is dangerous. This is weird. And to really get me, I should be unsettled by this. And it's just, it's not, I don't feel like it's doing what she wants the story to do.
Yeah,
I agree with you, Lesley, on the husband. If she really, does he not know this about her? Is this a secret from when she was abducted 20 years ago? Like there's too many disconnects in here that I'm making a lot of leaps of trying to figure things out, and I'm not quite getting there.
Rebecca, what were you going to say?
I would say that it says for this instant, it seemed the gnome was alive, and yes, that they're fairly ubiquitous in like Western culture and in American culture, but they may not be elsewhere. And also, if you want me to be disturbed by something, describe it to me. Right? Yeah. Were the eyes moving? Were they gleaming weirdly? Like what was creepy about that? Make this concrete for me, as opposed to kind of implied. I feel like they were not trusting their reader enough in some places, like deep and horrible feeling of revulsion, and then trusting the reader too much to make leaps in other places for them. So be really intentional, but also trust your readers with description and stuff. Like, readers are smart.
Totally. Don't tell me revulsion. If you want me to be revulsed, then make me revulsed. Get into the grotesque of it. What is it? Is it something about the limbs, the body part, the way the gnome is built, the face, the teeth, the eyes, the nose? Like, give me something. We've all read like Grimm's fairy tales that you could do things with gnomes and creatures and trolls. Like, you could show me a reason that I could be like bothered by this gnome, but I'm not. You're just telling me revulsed, and there's no backstory that you're giving me either.
Yeah, I wonder if that's. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lesley.
I'll just say that as a reader, there is nothing better than reading a story and there's a description that just perfectly encapsulates like how you understand from this description exactly what the narrator is feeling. So those little juicy bits of description that perfectly like get that just are perfect.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I wonder if that's why we're feeling, Richard mentioned like melodramatic, like the reaction is very big and we don't know why, because we haven't seen the gnome. And we haven't seen the gnome next to the other ones. And it's very specific that it's just the one in the middle that seems like it's alive. Why? Like, show us what it looks like. Show us why it's different.
Yeah. And one of the trickiest things I think is, I talk to my students about this a lot, is how do you reveal the things that are going on in your story? What do you keep? What do you bury? What do you slowly dole out bit by bit? It feels like there's some sort of history there. And I'm not saying you need to give me all of it about the time you're abducted and buried in a coffin with gnomes and you felt like they came to life as you lost your mind. Like, I don't know, you don't have to give me all that, but there should be some clue that this is not just in this moment. There's a history here. In fact, I would think this is like a character thing. And now I start to question the writer's ability with the husband. He should know this, right? That there's some trauma, because it seems like she has a very strong reaction, an out of line reaction to these gnomes. And then he's like, there they are. I'm having disconnect here, which is not good.
Yeah. Really good insights, everybody. We're going to move on to the next one, which is a horror / dark fantasy short story called Brain and Lemon Tea. Although she could barely taste the lemon tea on her mostly not rotted, thank you very much, tongue, Lilibet felt the warmth, and that's what mattered. Her friends didn't like the heat. They complained that their skin itched more, that it would slough off instead of flake. But a good cup of tea, one that truly inducted heat to the soul, was worth a little less skin. A scream ran ragged just below the library's broken window. The sound could only come from one type of being, a living human, a breather. Her brethren must be limping behind it in a slow but inevitable chase. Lilibet shook her head, determined to stay in her cozy nook, and turned the page. A sharp rap sounded at the window, startling her, and the book dropped to the carpet. She coaxed her legs off the couch and shuffled the 4 steps to the window. It took even more effort than last time. She squinted down to the street below. Demetrius. His skin had turned a beautiful blue in the last few months, like the dress Jane Austen wore in the portrait on the wall. Lilibet's skin had not moved to this lovely color yet, instead remaining a stubborn, sallow yellow. "Come hunt with us," Demetrius yelled up to her. He motioned with his hands, which, much to all her friends' high regard, still had 4 digits. He must have thrown a pebble at her window. Remarkable aim. Lilibet screwed up her face and shook her head. No hands. Lesley?
I love a zombie tale. I just
Reveal.
do.
Plot twist.
Plot twist. I love
Plot
a zombie tale. And I very much enjoyed reading this. As an editor, I don't think I would accept it because I'd have a lot of zombie tales. I don't want to keep pushing a bunch of zombie tales. But I'm like, oh, yes. But I do feel that this is verging on the beginning of we don't understand why. I do feel like possibly it's right after where we stopped. Like the why is she not going? Like, I mean, she's got to be hungry, right? Like, why won't she go out? And she'd rather sit and drink tea and read. I mean, I feel ya. That's where I would want to be. But you gotta give us a little bit of like, what is this story about? Could I happily, as a reader, read a story that's just a description of the zombie breeding books and drinking tea? Absolutely. As an editor, I'm gonna tell you, you're not gonna find a whole lot of readers that would be happy to sit and just read a tale about a zombie reading. So again, we're getting to that point where you're like, okay, you're setting it up. Beautiful, beautiful. Move it. Like, I love the description of her wanting to drink the tea and how the heat affects the other zombies, her friends, and they don't want to do it because it makes their skin slough off. And she's like, but it's worth it. I love that description, but you are going to have to give me a hint of what the actual plot is, because that's not a plot, that's a situation. And no matter how much a person loves the situation, eventually there has to be a reason. And we don't have it yet.
Yeah. All we have so far is that Lilibet is not like other zombies. Right.
Which is cool.
Which
I
is
like
great.
that.
It's interesting.
It's interesting, but you're not gonna find a whole lot of readers who are gonna want to stick with that. Like, there's very few readers like me that are like, fine, let's just read about the zombie reading. But we all have that one thing that we're like, I don't care what it says. I just enjoy this thing, and that happens to be my thing. But you're gonna have to give it a plot, and it's gonna have to come pretty quickly, because otherwise nobody's gonna stick around, because they're gonna be like, I don't want to watch somebody, like, you don't want to watch someone reading, which is basically what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Is we're watching someone read and drink tea.
Richard, what do you think?
I mean, so what we're doing, Pride and Prejudice and zombies here, is that what we're doing? I mean, for me personally, I'm not a big fan of historical fiction or historical horror. Although done right, like Kelly Robson's The Human Stain, love that story, right? I almost bounced at the first line just because I had something about the mostly not rotted, thank you very much tongue. I'm like, phew, okay, it's a voice, and so I wanted to give it more.
I liked it.
I loved it.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. You're totally digging it, and I'm like, okay, T, and like her name Lilibet, and like I get the total vibe of what it is. I kept reading. I was just about out when she said a breather. Then I'm like, oh, okay. So I don't know if I probably don't read as much zombie stuff as you do, Lesley. So I was like, skin flaking. What, do they have bad skin? I'm like, slough off. I'm like, oh, okay, Richard. I'm still waking up. I've only had one cup of coffee. Okay, zombies. Okay, and then we're reversing it that they're the zombies and there's a breather out there. So I'm like, okay, like the name Demetrius. I like that the skin had turned blue, although it has a bit of a Smurfy vibe to it. So I'm worried about that. Yeah, I don't know. And he's like, come hunt with us, and I'm like, okay. I mean, I watch plenty of historical stuff with my wife and I enjoy it. I just, with my horror, again, like you guys said, nothing's really happening. I don't have the plot. I think if you could do all of this, I would be definitely willing to sit in her space to see what she's telling me that's different. Why does she not go outside? The life she has, is this what she used to have? Does she miss the life she used to have? Has the whole world gone away? Like, I want to get to it, and you could probably sell me on it, but again, end of 250 words, and I don't know what's coming. I don't get a sense of that, title, the hook, the first line, the first paragraph. Like, I can't see where it's going, and so I'm rapidly losing interest. As much as I enjoy the voice, and I'll agree with you, Lesley, it's very conversational and intimate and casual, and like I feel very close to, like, I want to know what she's doing. I'm curious. I'm like, is she okay? I'm like, what's up with this guy? I'm like, I'm intrigued. And whether you go lean into romance or you're leaning to humor and horror, whatever you're going to do with it. But I think at the end of this, I'm like, nothing's really happening. So that's where I am on it.
Mm-hmm. Becky?
So I love this title, and I wanted to just like, I'll see a title in the flash contest and I'll be like, please be a good story, because that's such a good title. And then, you're disappointed when the story doesn't live up to the title. And I think this opening delivers on that title. I love that first line. I love it's doing what we were concerned about in a lot of these other pieces, is it's giving us character and emotion and opinion and placement right away. And then the rest of my notepad is just the words. Like, you write slough in a story and I'm like, I'm all in. I love sloughing anything. I like gross stories. I love the word brethren, right? Like, that's telling me something about the character and the situation. Shuffled, determined, that opinion of she was determined to finish reading. That's telling me something about the character, and that makes it feel intentional and on purpose. This is just dripping with character and opinions, and that kind of intentional prose will do a lot to pull me through, because yes, nothing is really happening, but if something happens right after this, it can recontextualize all of this for me and make it work, right? And so I don't think it necessarily, like, if you have really rich prose like this and it's going someplace very intentional, I feel like that this can work to carry me through to the next page, because I would totally turn the page on this. This is, yeah. I loved the language, especially of this.
Yeah, if I could add something here real quick. I think for those of you who are listening and paying attention, and for the author of the story, if you're out there, the beauty of this moment is he had 3 different reactions to the story. We have some people that love the first line, some that are not as in love with it. One person likes the story, another is like waiting for something to happen. Another person loves it. They can't read. That's the subjectivity of publishing and editing. And so if this is your story, if this is your voice, this is you. I get it. Be you. And understand that there's not, I think if anything, maybe we want to see a bit more where the story is going, but the vibe and the voice, I think we all dig the voice. And so whatever you're doing, author, and I probably could say this for all the people writing today that we're reading, if you do you and you are working, then don't worry if like 1 out of 3 would accept it, or I mean, it's tough. I'm sure when we read, we're accepting what, 3%, 2%, 1%, 1 in 100, 3 in 100. That's tough. You have to beat out a lot of great stories. This definitely feels like a personal story. The author's very much in this, so I just want to encourage this author and the others. You, do your thing, because and how it lands, that's going to be on the personal taste of that particular editor. Doesn't necessarily mean the story isn't working.
Well, and I mean,
Beautifully
I feel like I have said this to a lot of, because I get a lot of responses to rejection where people will be like, well, can you tell me what's wrong? Well, a rejection doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with the story.
Right.
I mean, you have to understand how many submissions magazines get or anthologies get, and you only have so much space. You can only buy so many stories.
Right.
So I reject stories often that I enjoyed.
Yeah.
And maybe I didn't take it because I have another story that has that same vibe. Or maybe I just published one a few issues ago and it just feels too similar. Or maybe for me the tone didn't work, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it didn't work for me. So it might work for Richard, or it might work for another editor out there. So a rejection doesn't mean that there's something wrong. So just
I'm curious, Lesley, when people do ask you what's wrong with it, do you tell them? Do you give them feedback?
Well, I send all the rejections for Apex Magazine. I don't have our slush readers do that, because getting a, hey, what was wrong with this story, or a thank you is fine. That's not like a negative thing. But I have gotten some very nasty responses. For sure. To rejections, and I would never ask our slush readers to do that. So like probably 95% of the time, I've not actually read the story, so no, I can't tell you what's wrong with it. If I've read it and if there is something specific that I'm like, this is why I'm rejecting it, then yes. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of writers that are out there going, it's not speculative enough, because that's when look at Becky, she's like, yes. Because for Apex Magazine, it needs to have a very strong speculative element. So if it's one of those where, well, yeah, okay, this is a ghost story, but those ghosts could just be in the narrator's imagination, there may not be ghosts at all. You know, I'm gonna pass on it, because I'm like, well, it might not be speculative. This might be a case of a mental illness that the narrator doesn't know they have. So if I read a story and there is something beyond, like, I would never send a rejection and be like, this didn't hold my attention, because that feels mean. Like, I would never say that, and it might hold your attention. If I have feedback to give you, you'll get it in the first rejection. You don't need to ask me for it, because if you ask me for it, I'm probably just going to delete it and be like, I'm sorry, I don't know.
I was just curious, because we just started reading for Gamut. We're in the second month of reading now, and we have our forum rejection, and then we have a couple forums. But if we have 3 or 4 editors reading right now, plus myself. So if you get a forum rejection, no comment, it means probably that was universally no. But on the places where we're maybes, or we're like split, where you have one editor who's like yes, and another's like maybe, and then another's like no, and then I read it and I'm like, I don't know what you're seeing. Or even there's times that I'm like, I love this, I don't know what, you guys are way off, this is awesome. I only try and put a personal comment on one if I know the person, if they're like one of my students, or a writer I've worked with, or just somebody I know personally. I sometimes will try and put in a little something to say, please send more, or like, oh, this is super cool. Just, I try not to get into the specifics of why it didn't work, although I think recently I did say one where we felt like it was just a bit slow. The pacing was a bit slow. And so but I always try and bracket that in a kind word, because I can tell you in the past when I've edited, and I try not to get into specifics, but in the past when I've given things like I didn't buy the character, like I didn't care. Like you're right, it always, no matter how nice you try and say it, it comes across mean, and I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And then people tend to respond to that. What do you mean? And, you know, I'm like, okay. So like I've gotten some nasty things back too. So I think the only time I really say anything these days is if it was really close. Like we get to the end of the month and we've got like 5 stories, you end up picking 2, and you were really, really close. I want to let them know that it was close. And if I'm going to say something, it's usually about what I liked and not about what I didn't.
Yeah.
Or I might just say we were split or something.
It's a delicate dance.
It is.
It is a delicate dance. And if I do give personal feedback on why it didn't work, I also say what did work. Because if I'm giving you that feedback, that means that I've read the entire story. And I had to really sit and think, like, so I will say, this is what worked. This is what didn't work for me.
Yeah.
But it isn't common to get.
Yeah. And I find it a lot easier to say things that are more like, we've gotten a lot of Gollum stories lately. And so we've just gotten a bunch. Anything that feels like it's not specific to the writer and the story that I'm going to hurt their feelings, you know, like, oh, this is, you know, we said our cap was 5,000 and somehow this is 7,000. So it can't, you know, if there's something I could say, oh, we've gotten a ton of clown stories or pizza stories or whatever lately, that I don't feel like that's going to hurt somebody's feelings, but I try to be careful about saying this was slow, or I would never say like I didn't care, or
you can tell when there's a specific anthology themed call.
Yeah.
Because then you suddenly get like a bunch of beach stories or a bunch of like.
So the takeaway here then, fellow writers, because yes, I'm one of you, is that it's not as personal as you think it is. And sometimes it is as personal as you think it is, that it's a delicate dance for the editors, and that what works for one might not work for the other, but also that, you know, you have to take into consideration the other stories that might be out there doing something similar to yours without you even knowing it. And that, you know, them not giving you feedback on why it didn't work is probably for the best. In some cases. So you got to keep going, and we do too. We're going to go on to the next story.
Sorry
here.
for derailing it.
No, it's okay. We've had such great insights here, and I think that it's all very valuable, but I want to make sure we try to get as many of these in as possible. So our next story is a contemporary queer Gothic novella called House, Body, Bird. My father presses the key into my mother's forehead, and she swings open. A split down the middle. A hairline crack in her lipsticked smile, widening to a void. Blue eyes once locked on me, now staring glassy into opposite corners of the basement. Her throat, her stomach, carving apart, neat and bloodless, ribcage splaying out. A cabinet of curiosities. An amber glow from within her shining off the clinking charm bracelets on her thin, languid wrists. Glittering on my gaunt father's glasses. My mother's slippered feet pivot. I fall back, cold stones against my palms. I scream, scramble to the wall, jostle the creaking shelves, knock free the archival boxes. They scatter all around me, spill all the tiny people not needed for the museum-worthy houses upstairs. Mother dolls in long skirts and placid smiles, daughter dolls in pigtails and rosy cheeks, white dogs and ginger cats, cloth and paper, wood and plastic, ceramic, shattering, a broken blue eye meeting mine. My mother, no face, no body left to recognize now, just the spaces inside, divided in that familiar way. Bedroom in her right breast, bathroom and closet in the left, kitchen below, and dining and parlor, all perfectly furnished. The little bed with its patchwork coverlet, tidy rows of doll dresses and shoes, woven rugs on the hardwood floor, and the vague ruby sparkle of something wet and living beneath, shifting with a steady pulse behind the floral wallpaper, trembling above the chandelier and matchstick furniture.
Can I go first on this one?
Yeah, I just want to observe. I thought I saw Leslie's hand go up.
Yep.
Nobody else though, right? Richard, go
I
ahead.
raised mine right at the end.
Oh, you did? Okay, I'm sorry, Becky.
I raised my pen.
Oh, it's the pen. Yeah, I didn't see the pen.
Raised my whole hand.
Pens don't count. It has to be your hand.
It has to be the hand. I'm sorry. Technically.
On a technicality.
On a technicality, we'll have Richard go first.
Of course, that's right when the garbage trucks go by. My dog. Sorry. I love this. And I that's why I wanted to go first, is I wanted to tell the author I love this. And if if I was acquiring novellas, I would be like, send me this right now, please. So that's how I feel about it. I really dig it. The first line I thought was amazing. My father presses a key to my mother's forehead and she swings open. Like I went, ooh, okay. Um, I noticed, I think Lesley, when you got to the body parts and like opening up her body and stuff, I could picture all this. I'm really curious to see where this is going. I get a little sense of with the dolls and the ones that aren't worthy of the museum quality houses upstairs, that this has a little bit of that kind of hereditary vibe to it, right? The dioramas or whatever we call these things. I like the body details on body horror. It's not too gory for me. It's not that I don't do gore. It's not that I don't publish gore. It's not that I don't write it. It's not that I don't watch it. I just like it in smaller doses. And so I think the balance of sensory stuff in here is really interesting. Cabinet of Curiosities, I like that, although at the same time it is a bit cliche, but then we kind of unpack her. So I'm kind of like, I don't know. Like at this point, I'm really curious to see where it goes. So I read the whole thing. We don't do novellas at Gambit, unfortunately, but whoever the author is, if you have something short, please send me something because I love your voice. And I think this is exactly the kind of like maximalism, grotesque body horror, sensory detailed, emotional, the history in here that really works for me. So I read it all the way through. I like it quite a bit.
Lesley?
I love the title. Like that's the first thing I wrote down. I was like, love the title. Love the first sentence. I started to feel in the third paragraph where it gets glittering on my gaunt father's glasses is I did start to get a little bit like, okay. And then I was thrown like the point where I put my hand up and then I put it back down because the writing in this is delicious. Like it is beautiful, beautiful writing. But I had that point where they're going that they screamed and they, they fall back and they scramble against the wall. I had this moment of like, if you're this terrified, how are you this cognizant of all of these details? Because a lot, like, that's like, I had that moment, but then I was like, yeah, but I love all these details. So I put my hand back down. So I kind of did have that moment of like, if you're so afraid, I kind of am not sure I believe that you would be able to recognize all of these very specific details. I did absolutely love that, like that opening. I loved the second paragraph. I started to feel like maybe we're getting a little bogged down, because you do have something incredibly intriguing that is definitely going on this opening. I just am a little bit afraid that it might get bogged down in this beautiful voice and all of this description. Yeah. So for me, I could use it to just be slightly leaner. Like I don't want to lose that voice. I don't want to lose the detail, but make sure that every detail you're putting in, every description has a purpose, like a really strong purpose that is building your world up and not bogging it down. Because it is right on that precipice for me of being bogged down in. And I mean, like I said, it's beautiful. The language is beautiful. The description, like I can feel it. It's wonderful. But you do hit a point where you're like, okay, but it's too much wonderful. Yeah. So I would really question every description. Like, do I need this?
Yeah, you make a great point there, Lesley, because I was thinking if this is going to be flash fiction and this is 250 of 1,000, okay, I'm in. I'm sold. I can handle it. But then I'm like, oh, novella. So we're talking more than 15,000 up to 40. Ooh, yeah. If the whole thing is like that, that's going to be intense. You're like Cormac McCarthy territory now. Maybe it's just a really intense opening scene and then we're going to back off of it. Maybe it's an important scene, but if so, yeah. I mean, you make a very good point there, Lesley, that it could be problematic. Sorry. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Becky.
I love the title. I love that first line. And I just like Lesley, like I put my pen up. I like the second or third sentence of that last paragraph, but then I kind of lowered it a vague ruby sparkle of something wet and living, because that is a great, like, oh, wait a second, that's contradictory and that's really interesting.
Yeah.
But the whole time I was skimming ahead a little bit, because who's telling me this story? How do they feel about these descriptions? These are great, rich descriptions. Okay. And then I was like, great, they're screaming, they're terrified, but then we go back into more descriptions.
Right.
And these are great descriptions, but and with a novella, you have a little bit more space in that beginning. Like, I'm going to give you, a couple of pages, and I'm not sure that I would have stopped reading, right? But I would have, like, my little editorial brain was like wanting to make a comment, like, where is the story coming from? Who is telling me this? Get more of the emotion. Again, that opinion that we've talked about, like how we know that they're scared, but then we go back into these lovely, rich, almost calm and matter-of-fact descriptions of this, which makes it seems like it's happened before, but then why are they screaming?
Right.
So I'm a little bit confused about how to feel about these descriptions, which makes it hard for me to get immersed in the opening.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I was thinking, why do they scream? Because the mother's slippered feet pivoted because she's coming to life and she shouldn't. It's just like you said, it's a weird mix of, I feel like we've been here before. My father presses a key into my mother's forehead and she swings open. It doesn't sound like shock. It sounds like, well, time to give mom a little maintenance, right? Or whatever we're doing. So then when we unpack it, like they're fascinated, but at the same time, why are they horrified then? So you make a good point, both of you there. If I can understand why there's a scream, because if you are truly terrified, you're right, Lesley, that you'd be running the other way. If your mom came to life, if you didn't know that she was robotic or mechanical, steampunk mother, then you'd probably really be freaked out and you'd be gone. You wouldn't be sitting there to give us these rich descriptions of her cabinet of curiosities. You'd be terrified, right? So to the author, I guess if you can clarify that a bit, that would probably help us. Hold on.
So it sounds like we want clarification on the timeline of the event. That, like, we have this beautiful intro, this beautiful first line, this delicious, like you said, Lesley, description of the horror that is unfolding. And then there's a scream that pulls us out of that spell, and then we go back into the spell. So if we can clarify the timeline of the event, maybe the scream comes after that intro period, or maybe it felt to me like after the scream, something was supposed to happen, and instead we went back into the description, which is juicy.
Yeah.
Or some contextualization of the scream.
Sure.
Why are we screaming?
Right. And they've been working on her for a long time, and now she finally has come back to life. Did she used to be alive? How did she become mechanical?
Is this a discovery that mom is a dollhouse?
Yeah, exactly. Like,
which is such a cool idea.
Woof. Yeah.
I mean, Maria Devana Headley did some interesting stuff. Did she do one called The Orange Tree that had something kind of like this that was really fascinating?
It's a great piece, though. This is a great piece.
Oh, yeah. It's absolutely wonderful.
Gorgeous.
Yep.
Question. You need to question your own writing and be like, okay, is this working for me or against me?
Absolutely. Our next entry is a horror short story called Lingering Chill. Budget cuts had reduced the division of ghosts to a skeleton crew, but that didn't put an end to the hauntings. The dead stopped for no one and all. Helen McCann worked late into the night, her lit window in the ancient government building adding a yellow glow to the otherwise dark business district downtown. Her usual role in the division was that of an administrator, a bureaucrat with years of experience typing up reports and drafting policy, but the backlog of haunting reports had piled up, dozens of spirits with no one to investigate them or even send a form letter confirming receipt of the complaint. The division of ghosts was drowning. Bailing water took the form of Helen's late-night bureaucratic triage as she sorted through the haunting reports. Not a haunt, minor haunt, violent haunt. Most reports fell into the first two categories. Each classification had its own form letter of acknowledgement, and the division's file management system would fill most of the relevant information to generate the letter itself, so long as Helen told it which form was appropriate. The work was cyclical and rote, an endless repetition of read, categorize, generate, and proofread, and Helen was lost in the hypnotic flow of tedium until a report caught her attention and held it. I'm begging someone to help me. I've filed a dozen complaints with this office and no one will call me back. The police and my landlord say this is your area. Lesley?
I'm not sure I enjoy the cleverness of the word choice. Like it eventually, like the first time, like I wrote har har after the first sentence because it's like it is very much like clever wordplay, which is fine in a little bit. It felt a little heavy-handed here. I'm very confused at this point who Helen, like I understand Helen's working in the ghost realm and this is all corporate bureaucratic. But and it seems she's working for the ghosts. But I don't understand why, and I'm not sure why I should care. Like that is my biggest thing here is I don't understand. Like I don't want to hear anyone's corporate bureaucratic day job drudgery. So why? Yeah, it's interesting that we're in the ghost realm, but if I'm in the ghost realm, that's not where I want to go. Like I don't want to hear like the corporate drudgery continues. And so I had just a really hard time understanding like so she's filing this paperwork about these different hauntings, but who is she filing it for and for what purpose? um and that's, I guess maybe if I had the answer to that question I would be more invested, but right now I'm not invested and I'm slightly annoyed at like the word puns.
Yeah, I'm that's interesting that you say that, Lesley, because I thought that she was filing paperwork for the living about the
It's very
dead.
confusing
Yeah, no, I
because
could see that.
I spent a whole lot of time trying to figure out exactly who is she working for, and to what end. And I don't have that answer here. And I really feel like for me to want to continue reading, I need that answer now. Like it can't come 2 pages from now because I'll be out.
Yeah.
Because right now I just don't. I'm not connecting with this story.
I also wonder if the reports she's sorting are digital or physical, because if it's physical paperwork, then I wonder like where we are, what time are we in, and maybe we are in purgatory or something. But if it's not, I'm just curious about like if we're gonna go into the bureaucratic stuff, like where are we? Rebecca.
Yeah, it was just interesting enough to keep me reading, but I was not super invested in it. My only note on this is long sentences. And there is a lot of long sentences, one after another, which I guess makes sense for the character and the perspective, but I'm not getting a lot of character. I'm not really sure if she's alive or dead. I'm not sure if she's working for the dead dealing with the living or for the living dealing with the dead. I'm not really sure. I would like a little bit of, I mean, her lit window in the ancient government building is something, but she says it's adding a yellow glow, which means she's looking out of the window, and that doesn't tell me anything about where she is. So that near distance is missing a little bit for me. That last line is interesting, but I think that a lot of this could be rearranged to get that up a little bit and hook us. If this is a short story, I think that we want to get hooked a little bit faster, and the bureaucratic stuff is not doing it for me. But it was just when nobody raised their hand, it was just interesting enough that we were all kind of like, all right, but okay, come on, let's go, So it's not bad. It's got some really interesting things going on.
Maybe just a little bit more focus. Yeah. Richard?
Yeah, I totally I'm gonna echo what you guys are saying. This was close. I felt like I was watching what's the TV show where you're like America's Got Talent, you're getting ready to hit the X button or whatever, because I read the first line and I was like, budget cuts have reduced the division of ghosts to a skeleton crew, but that didn't put an end to the hauntings. A dead stop for no one. And I apologize to the author. I'm not big on humor and horror. If you're gonna go there, turn it into Beetlejuice then. Just go all the way in there. The parts of Beetlejuice where we're on the other side and we're in the office and we're dealing with the drudgery of it, hilarious. And also quite kind of grotesque and gruesome in a funny way, right? I quite enjoyed that. The tricky thing is when you say the work was cyclical and wrote an endless repetition of read, categorize, generate, and proofread, I'm losing interest, because the tricky thing is when you write about something that's mundane and boring and rote, that the story can come across as mundane and boring and rote. You write about characters that are unlikable. People don't like them, so it's hard for them to root for them. It's a really tricky thing to do and to do well. I was ebbing and flowing. I was like, I'm in, I'm out. I'm like, oh, I'm back in. Oh, I'm almost out. Okay. So I was right on the edge there. And then at the end, like, okay, so someone's asking for help. Yeah, it's like, and do a bit more here, I think. It's not that I'm not emotionally invested, I think, as you guys said. And it's not that I'm bored, but there are lines that start to, even that one sentence, you said it's long sentences. The work was an endless repetition of read, categorize, generate, read, like even those words, like, oh my God, okay, go. Like, we get it. Some really, I mean, Haruki Murakami, Wind Up Bird Chronicle, he has some really interesting moments of just mundane life and having a bowl of noodles, and it offsets the supernatural, it offsets the historical articles. Find a way to balance that, because at this point I don't see a whole lot that's going to want me get me to keep reading. Sorry.
No, it's a good point. It's a pitfall if you're gonna lean into a certain style or voice to imply that monotony.
Yeah,
you run the risk of losing the reader along the way unless
being
you have
monotonous. Yeah. Like I love Gattaca, and there's scenes in the beginning where you're like, oh, go to the drudgery and everything's gray, and you're going to the office and everybody, you're a cog in the wheel. I'm like, okay, but give me a bit more. And I'll just add that point of clarity that I think both Lesley and Rebecca said, that where are we? Which realm are we in? This world or the ghost side? And just make sure that's clear so we know who she's working for. Is she alive or dead? Just like nail down a couple of those details and then roll the story out. Because at this point, we're like, oh, it's a ghost story, and someone's calling to ask for help about a ghost. That seems pretty on the nose. Like, I want get weirder, faster.
Get weirder, faster.
Yes.
I feel like if we had some clarification, like of where we are, who Helen is, and then if you could get into what this plea for help seems to be like the jumping off point for the real story.
Right.
You know, give us a clear view of who Helen is and then jump off. Don't bog us down.
Yeah. Like, I'm not sure if the person writing is human, help me, there's a haunting, or I'm a ghost in a house.
And I need help with this haunting.
I'm not haunting it well enough, right? I don't know. And like, it's just barely holding on to my intrigue. Like, I just need to give me a little something more. There's some nice lines in here, but it's tricky when you pay homage, when you lean into the classic elements of whatever you're doing. In this case, a ghost story. That helps you to access the story. We go, oh, a ghost story, Division of Ghosts. Okay, you laugh, you get it, or you don't, whatever. And then you're into it. What next? What makes this special? What's original and different about this story? I can't see it yet. Maybe this is going to be amazing. I would just like a little upfront to kind of hook me more.
Definitely. I think that we are coming up on our time, but we might have time for one more. It was a little unclear to me. We're going to go ahead and do one more and see if we can get one more in. I know we can do it. This is the first 250 or so from an adult horror fantasy novel titled These Mortal Woes. Casey's mood was already sour when she approached her apartment to find the door ajar. The frayed lanyard hung limply from Casey's fingers as the keys clinked uselessly. It was possible her mother tried to kick it closed and it never latched. She hoped no one was stupid enough to break in. She could just imagine an idiot trying to steal their old TV as the antenna poked them in the eye. Nothing was worth the effort here. Casey took a step forward and listened. She only lived with her mother, technically. With so many people in and out of their home, it never felt like it was just the two of them. And on days when Casey came home from the restaurant early, without warning, she was more likely to walk into the apartment to find her mother in a compromising position. Casey shuddered and willed the scarring images to clear her mind. She was both used to it and disturbed every time. With a tentative hand, Casey pushed the metal hunk open wider and cautiously looked around the dingy apartment. The hallway was silent. The door across from her mother's bedroom, was closed. The tiny kitchen down the hallway to the right was unoccupied. Casey took a step forward. The ragged floor creaked and she hesitated. Nothing responded. No further sounds were made. Thoughts began to swirl in her mind. Dark images, pictures that haunted her dreams. Was this the day to walk in and find?
Really?
Becky.
I was intrigued by clinked. I love good onomatopoeia words that kind of ping in our minds like that. I loved the description of the antenna poking, somebody in the eye and getting her opinion again, getting the real character onto the page, the weirdness that makes us us. And so given this is a novel, I think that it's doing a lot of things that I appreciate on this first page. We're characterizing Mom, we're characterizing Casey. We know who and where they are. We kind of have a sense of like the timeline that we're in, which is good. I'm kind of grounded in a setting. And we have, immediately presented some kind of problem or something that's hinting that this is more than just a murder mystery or something, right? There's something a little bit speculative about that last couple of lines. So, yeah, I would turn the page.
Richard.
Sure. I think for novels, I give the author a little more room to see what they're going to do. I like the title, These Mortal Woes. The first line, Casey's mood was already sour when she approached her apartment to find the door ajar. For a novel, that's not a great hook. Like, I want you to do more. Like, how is this the inciting incident? How is this the moment in time after which things will never be the same? I think about Fahrenheit 451, it was a pleasure to burn. I think about The Dark Tower, the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. You have a sense of what's coming, right? So I don't get that in the first line. Give us more. There's something interesting going on here. She's worried about catching her mom. Is this a brothel? Is this like, I don't know when and where I am. It says adult horror fantasy. So what I'm not getting is the fantasy. I want something, if it's fantasy, doesn't it imply a whole built world? So where are we? Where is this place? If it's an other world, it's not the world we know, show me a bit more. Help me to understand. We talking Harry Potter here? Are we talking, I don't know, I'm trying to get a sense of where this is going. I don't get a lot of the horror either. Is this historical? Because that wasn't in the title. Usually it is for a genre or subgenre. But I'm very curious. I'm intrigued. I don't know if the author cut that off with the ellipses for the 250 word count, or if that better not be the opening to the book. Walking and find ... nothing. But I'm intrigued.
Lesley.
I would keep reading here, but I feel myself already questioning whether Kelsey is the character who this story, Casey, sorry, Kelsey was in the gnome story. If Casey is the character who I really want to hear from, because the mother almost sounds more interesting.
Having fun.
In this scene, Casey seems kind of bland. We know she's not in a good mood. We know that she has feelings about her mother's activities, and that they don't seem to have a lot in terms of like things that would be monetarily interesting to thieves. But I'm almost like I from the way that we're getting glimpses of the mom from Casey's description, I'm kind of like, the mom sounds more interesting, and I want kind of what's going on there. And maybe we get that. This could be a novel that is told in two different perspectives. But I'm just kind of feel at this point, like I would keep reading. Like at this point, I'm not out. But I need Casey to step up her game and get a little bit entertaining, like interesting, because like we all come home grouchy from work. I mean, I work from home, so I stay at home, grouchy from work. But make her more interesting to me. Like you don't want your readers to be going, yeah, but tell me about the mom.
Right.
You know, like
Yeah.
they need to be interested in the character who's the narrator, who's the point of view character. So I would hope that we're gonna get just a little bit more of her voice, a little bit more of Casey's thoughts and her habits. Like, what makes her the character that this story needs to be told from? What makes her interesting and makes this her tale, rather than her being kind of a side character to what makes the mom interesting? And right now, I'm very much interested in like the mom.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and I think that that kind of connects with what Richard was saying, that like we, if this is a novel, then we should be like right with Casey from the get-go. We should have a good idea of who she is, what her personality is, because she's going to be taking us on this journey, right? And I definitely agree with what you said, Lesley. It feels like Casey's just holding the camera for the film, right? That we're stepping into the situation, but we don't see Casey at all because Casey's holding the camera. And I'm curious why. Like, what about that seemed like a good entry point for the story that is going to be told here. I'm curious. Yeah.
And I was gonna say, the thing is that this could turn around. There are wonderful novels out there where the narrator, the point of view character, is a normal, not interesting person, but they get thrown into by outside forces into that makes them wonderful characters. Like, it is their story. And that absolutely could be what this is setting up.
Sure.
But just right from here, I am questioning, because I'm just like, yeah, but what about Casey's mom? Like, what is she doing?
Yeah.
Because she just seems more interesting from this. But again, it's a novel. You got a lot of words to play with. So that doesn't mean that this is the wrong choice. Just the impression the first 250 words give, which could be exactly what you were going for. Like, you want to set up that Casey's no one spectacular or super interesting, and then give her a journey that shows the readers like, oh wait, but you underestimated her. Like, I would love that. Like, I'm hoping that's what this is.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I'm curious. So was this the day she would walk in and find ... What do you guys think comes next? Because it can't be her mom with somebody, because we've already talked about
We know that happens,
compromising position. What do you think it is? Any idea?
Well, you know that it's just the two of them who technically live in this apartment. So, I mean, is it somebody who they're trying to avoid from their past? Like, that's where my mind immediately goes. I would hope it would be something more interesting than that, though.
Becky, do you have any thoughts on where you think it might be going?
Something with her mom, maybe, something horrible, but like a premonition is what was kind of the vibe I got from that. But again, yeah, I would hope that it would be something that I would go, oh, right. Like, I would want to lean forward when they finish that sentence. Yeah.
Aly, do you have a thought of where it was going?
My immediate thought was that her mom would be dead, that she'd walk in and find her mom dead.
Find her mom dead. Okay. Oh, that's good. I think I keep coming back to it says adult horror fantasy novel. I'm thinking it has to be something fantastic, right? Although and if she's dead how?
Yeah. Crazy
compromising position. I was thinking brothel, right? Because it feels like she has a lot of visitors, like something, or she just dates a lot of men, whatever. Again, I don't know if we're set in a made-up world, if we're set in 1800 England. Like, I don't know. Something that they've gotten into. I'm wondering if it's something fantastic, something dark and fantastic and monstrous and weird and if you're gonna open a book, give us that crazy scene where you're like, oh shit, here we go. All right, now I want to keep going to see what comes next, right?
Absolutely. This has been a really great set of pieces to discuss, and some incredible insights, both into horror as a genre, to a play space for people to enjoy as readers and as writers, but also really interesting insights into Lesley, Richard, and Rebecca as editors, frankly. I learn something new about everybody every time we do this. And I love having the guests on. Richard, this has been fantastic.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you so much for being here. We are, in fact, out of time for this snap judgment, but we want to take a moment to thank everybody who submitted their pieces, everyone whose pieces we didn't get to. Thank you for submitting anyway. And, we wish you the best of luck. And for those of you who did submit, we apologize and we thank you for being so brave to have your words spoken on air,
So brave.
and to experience this for the sake of education, frankly, because we're all learning new stuff every time. We really hope that the judges' comments were insightful and helpful, and that you have something that you can take away from today's snap judgment that will increase your ability to tell the story that you want to tell. If you enjoyed what you saw and heard here today, be sure to visit us online at apex-magazine.com and follow us on Twitter at apexmag, although Twitter is kind of a sinking ship nowadays, isn't it? We're going to have to really figure that one out. You can currently support us by helping fund our Kickstarter for the Map of Lost Places anthology, edited by Sherry Renee Thomas and Lesley Conner. Incredible. The links will appear below somehow by magic. If you'd like to learn more about the craft and business of writing, check out our new educational branch, Reach Your Apex, where you can take classes and workshops with luminaries such as Primi Mohammed, Ai Jiang, Arlie Sorg, or even our special guest today, Richard Thomas. His next class is Office Hours, where for 2 hours you can ask him anything about writing, editing, teaching, publishing, or more specific instances and questions about something that you're writing or having trouble with writing. Anything goes. Find out more at www.reachyourapex.com. Lesley, thank you for being here. Rebecca, welcome and thank you. Richard, it has been a pleasure. I think we all need a t-shirt that says "Get Weirder Faster."
Yes.
I agree.
I think that was our quote of the day.
I like that.
For sure. I wrote that down in like big letters.
That's the title. I did it on a Post-it. It's here. You can't see it.
There we go.
Blurred my background.
Yep.
Get weirder faster, everybody. Let's all 2024. Let's all get weirder faster.
Right. I like it.
Thank you all for being here. Thanks for having me back. Again, my name is Aly Grauer. I'm your host and narrator. You can find me online at Dreams to Become on most social media platforms. And we have enjoyed this very much. And we look forward to enjoying the next Snap Judgment with you sometime in the future. I'm not sure when. A couple months from now, probably. TBD. Stay tuned. Follow us on Twitter, The Sinking Ship. And we'll let you know when that is and who our magical next guest will be. Thank you all for tuning in. And if you're watching this after the fact, thank you for watching it anyway. That's all for now. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.